I don't think there's a single film out there that evokes desolation and loneliness quite like Angel's Egg does. There's just something about the way that Yoshitaka Amano's starkly coloured, gorgeously detailed artwork combines with the swelling orchestral score and the wide, lingering shots that make the viewer feel as if they, much like the characters they are observing, exist in a space of vast isolation cut off from any source of meaning or hope. It's an absolute triumph of atmosphere and animation, and we're unlikely to see anything else like it anytime soon. But yeah, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. If you've any sort of interest in obscure anime, chances are you've come across Angel's Egg in some form or other, but just in case you haven't, I'll give a brief overview. Angel's Egg is an OVA released in 1985, written and directed by Mamoru Oshii, an extremely prolific anime director who would later helm the 1995 Ghost in the Shell movie. Most of the art was done by Yoshitaka Amano, best known for his work on the Final Fantasy series. The film is extremely cryptic, making heavy use of symbolism and containing almost no dialogue, and the plot itself is very minimal. We follow a young girl who lives in an absolutely desolate city, which with its dark, winding streets, crumbling Victorian facades, and seemingly infinite stairways seems like it's plucked right out of a nightmare. Living in what seems to be complete isolation, the girl takes care of an egg which she believes to contain a beautiful bird. One day, a young soldier arrives in the city and things go awry for the girl. Without a doubt, the first thing that'll strike most viewers about Angel's Egg is its visuals. Amanu's art is absolutely breathtaking, with every frame of the film rendered in exquisite detail. Anyone familiar with Amanu's work will be aware that his art rarely adheres to the conventions of anime. Rather, he blends the style with extensive inspiration from a great variety of sources, from traditional Japanese block printing to Western styles such as Art Nouveau. While his work in Angel's Egg is perhaps a bit more anime-esque than a good deal of his other art, it still looks tremendously distinct from most anime of the era, and a great deal of elements that define much of Amano's work are evident throughout, such as the stark line work, muted colour schemes, and, as mentioned before, the minute detail with which every frame is rendered. The vaguely European ruins in which the film takes place strongly reflect the influence Amano drew from Western art, and the soldier character, with his elaborate get-up and great unwieldy weapon, seems to have stepped right out of one of the JRPGs that Amano would help visually characterize in a few years. This, combined with the film's stirring and haunting choral soundtrack, makes it a deeply immersive audiovisual experience. It engages the viewer's senses from the moment it begins and lingers with them long after that remarkable final shot has faded. Beyond its audiovisual qualities, though, Angel's Egg is a film that, by its very nature, invites imaginative interpretation. It's rich in symbolism, with Christian iconography being a recurring element, but it offers next to nothing in the way of direct explanation. The film's setting is a desolate wasteland that hints at some apocalyptic event, but we're told of it only very indirectly, and the elements of the film's rather thin plot feel as if they've been plucked out of some greater context that we, the viewer, just haven't been let in on. We're haunted by the question of who the girl and the soldier could be, and how they came to be in this dismal place. By the end of the film, we're left with such a hefty set of unanswered questions that we're almost forced to put together our own interpretation just to put our minds somewhat at ease. Before we begin, it ought to be stated that, as indicated earlier, Angel's Egg is primarily an audio-visual experience. Any deeper narrative that might be read into it will necessarily be a matter of personal interpretation. Oshii himself outright stated that he does not fully understand what the film means, which is a sentiment expressed by a great many artists known for producing cryptic or ambiguous work. It's perhaps a bit cliché to say no interpretation is incorrect, but it's clear that, at least in this case, that very much is true. If Oshii himself is hesitant to ascribe particular significance to the film's imagery, then we are ultimately left only with the interpretations of the individual viewer. And if yours happen to be drastically different from mine, well, only know that I am by no means trying to assert that my interpretations are more valid. On the contrary, I'd be delighted to hear some alternative takes on the film's meaning. With that out of the way, let's get into my own personal take on the film. Like a lot of people, I flip-flopped on the matter extensively, and I can't be sure I won't change my mind again. But also, like a lot of viewers, the film's heavy use of Christian symbolism is what primarily intrigued me. As most viewers are probably aware by now, Mamoru Oshii is a man with a complicated relationship with Christianity. He intended at one point to enter the seminary, but for one reason or another he opted not to, and instead entered the animation industry. The influence that Christianity had upon him, however, echoes strongly throughout his work. Jan Scott Frazier, an animator who has collaborated with Oshii, said of him, "He knows Christianity better than most Christians do. He knows what the Christian symbolism means. He doesn't just know the outlines of the dogma, he knows it all the way down. Nowhere is this more evident than in Angel's Egg." Biblical imagery and themes recur throughout the film, but they're rarely used in a way that could be called reverent. At one point, in one of the film's few sequences of dialogue, the man relates to the girl a grim version of the Noah's Ark story. In this one, the dove that Noah sends out fails to return, thus leaving the last remaining humans to drift aimlessly on the floodwaters, abandoned by God. In another sequence, a group of ghostly fishermen take to the streets of the city. They throw their harpoons at a school of shadowfish that are drifting through the streets, but only succeed in destroying the city further. This naturally calls to mind the Bible's description of the disciples as fishers of men in reference to their efforts to preach the gospel. The film, it seems, is condemning these efforts as not only fruitless, but actively destructive. And then, of course, there's the egg at the center of the film. The young girl sincerely believes that the egg contains a bird within it. The man, however, attempts to persuade her otherwise, telling her that the heartbeat and breathing she hears within the egg are merely wishful thinking. And when, in the film's final sequence, the man destroys the egg, we see that it does indeed appear to contain nothing at all. In this moment, the film seems to confirm the soldier's assertion that the girl's sincere belief, which had been seemingly her sole source of comfort in the bleak, empty world she inhabited, was in truth completely without merit. And in the film's striking final shot, a figure heavily implied to represent God, depicted as an enormous mechanical eye, covered in angelic statues, rises from the water and ascends into space. With this, the last few remnants of humanity are left alone, floating on what seems, in a shocking final twist, to be an overturned ark. As the film ends, we're left with a distinct impression of God as an aloof mechanical beast, quick to abandon humanity to a lonely fate. With all this considered, it's very easy to draw the conclusion that the primary driving force behind Angel's Egg is Oshii's own resentful sentiment toward a faith he is now disillusioned with. This was certainly the conclusion I jumped to at first. Unsurprisingly though, I quickly came to learn that this was a great oversimplification. I suppose what really pushed me to reconsidering my interpretation of Angel's Egg was coming to understand that I had a rather shallow interpretation of Oshii's relationship with Christianity. I'd assumed it was a hostile one, but looking back, this was really based on nothing but my own naive assumption that anyone's relationship with their form of faith must be negative. But after looking into the matter a bit more, I came to learn that his real attitude was much more mature and ambivalent. In an interview with Carl Gustav Horn, conducted over a decade after the release of Angel's Egg, Oshii stated that though he no longer considered himself a Christian, he had been fascinated by the Bible from a young age and still read it on occasion. Moreover, I came to realize that the sources I read seemed inconsistent as to why Oshii wished to enter the seminary. I had assumed he must wish to become a priest, but some of the sources I read indicate that this was never his intention, and that he simply wished to study Christianity more closely. I began to contemplate that if that really were the case, then perhaps Oshii never really saw Christianity as a religion at all, but merely a source of artistic inspiration. After all, his Urusei Yatsura films, like the manga series they're based on, draw heavily on Japanese mythology, and his live-action sci-fi film Avalon is an extended reference to Arthurian legend. Perhaps Oshii is simply a creator who draws great inspiration from the various myths that have shaped both Western and Eastern societies, with Christianity being prominent among those myths. I don't know if this is an epiphany that every viewer experienced, or if maybe I was just very slow on the uptake. But either way, it changed my perspective on the film drastically. I came to realize that what I'd initially seen as hostility toward faith could in fact be read in much more nuanced ways. In particular, I extensively reconsidered the aspect of the girl's belief that the egg contained a bird within, which I initially saw as a reflection of futile faith in something non-existent. Looking back, however, I came to realize that, in fact, the film doesn't treat her faith in the egg in a strictly negative manner. Take, for instance, the girl's general disposition throughout the film. While she is consistently portrayed as meek and timid, She never displays signs of the overwhelming fear or crushing loneliness that the film so effectively imparts to its viewers. The soldier character is similarly emotionless, but in his case, it seems rooted in a despondency that stems from his absolute lack of direction and purpose. At one point, the character outright laments that he no longer recalls where he comes from or where he is going. The girl is distinguished from him by a very subtle sense of optimism, or at the very least, seeming obliviousness to the crushingly grim nature of her surroundings, that is conveyed through her mellow and detached nature. Indeed, there are only 2 moments in the film where she can be really said to show strong emotion. One, of course, is when she lets out an agonized cry at having found the egg shattered by the soldier. But the other, more understated example is when she is earnestly murmuring to the bird that she believes to live within the egg. The impression I was left with is that whether or not the girl's faith in the egg had any basis in reality, it was her source of sanity and comfort in the lonely world she inhabited. The thing into which all of her emotional energy was concentrated, thus allowing her to detach herself from her surroundings. It struck me as the film presenting an excellent microcosm of the relationship many people have with their faith, without going out of its way to portray such a relationship as either positive or negative, but merely one which a person would almost inevitably form in such grim circumstances. And then, of course, in the film's final scene, which I admit I had no idea how to incorporate into my initial interpretation, the girl is shown in statue form, given pride of place among the angels gathered on the great godlike eye. It's difficult to see this as anything other than a direct implication that the girl is being rewarded with eternal life, or some rough equivalent, for the unshakable faith that she held on to even when she seemingly had every reason to give it up. Of course, this isn't to say that the theme of disillusionment with faith is not present in Angel's Egg. It very much is. That's obvious enough in the simple fact that the movie retells the Noah's Ark story as a tale of abandonment. But perhaps the best thing to take away from this is that it's a mistake to treat Angel's Egg as if it makes, or even aims to make, any singular statement or express any simplified one-note views. The film is clearly not intended to present some solid thesis on the concept of faith, but is rather intended as a reflective meditation on faith in general, neither praising nor condemning it, but merely encouraging the viewer to contemplate the role that it might, or might not, play in the life of a given individual. But regardless of how you personally interpret Angel's Egg, there really is no denying that there never has been an anime like this before, and likely never will be again. In an analysis of Oshii's work published in Censors of Cinema, Richard Suchensky refers to Angel's Egg as a film that could only have been made at the height of the bubble economy, in reference to the real estate bubble that was picking up in Japan around the time of Egg's release. There's probably a good deal of truth to this. Angel's Egg may have received some much-deserved praise in recent years, but at a time when anime was dominated by fast-paced, action-centric stuff like Fist of the North Star or the Gundam franchise, it's clear to see why it would probably have been more than a little difficult to market it to the public. The fact that Oshii created such a deeply personal and esoteric film in a medium as expensive and time-consuming to produce as anime at such an early point in his career is remarkable. In this regard, Angel's Egg stands out as not only a striking piece of animation, but also as a record of a uniquely optimistic time in anime history, when at least a few studios were open to the idea that the medium could be a vehicle for complex artistic expression, as well as commercially viable entertainment. Thank you very much for watching. How did you interpret Angel's Egg? Let me know, and please consider liking and subscribing.